everything else, the American people want leaders who will keep the peace, keep the peace, keep the peace. Henry Cabot Lodge and I keep the peace. No, Mr. Khrushchev. No, Mr. Khrushchev. No, Mr. Khrushchev. Lodge and I, no, firm diplomacy. No, Mr. Khrushchev. No, Mr. Khrushchev. No, peace for America and the world.
The terms slave patrol and militia were interchangeable and synonymous, literally the same exact thing.
With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discord of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood.
Currently, what the communists call their Negro Revolutionary Movement, now masquerading behind the humanitarian banners of civil rights, is contributing tremendous momentum to the communist plans to take over the United States.
You tell them white folk in Mississippi that all the scared niggas are dead. We want black power. We want black power.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The amendment would also give the federal government the power to enforce that principle.
I heard about Sacramento. I was like, damn, these brothers are bad. They're here up in Sacramento in the capital, packing.
Tear down this wall.
So then we have the whole civil rights movement of the 60s, and we get the Civil Rights Bill enacted. So the Nixon administration goes into full force at that point and institutes the Southern strategy. Racist dog whistling, consolidation of the Republican Party into a Southern constituency. The trend of Confederate statue erections goes into full effect all over the South. The drug war connects blacks to heroin and the radical left to marijuana, and both drugs are heavily criminalized.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all don't quote me. It's hard. You start out in 1954 by saying never. By 1968, you can't say anything. That hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than white. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than everything. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Nixon policy advisor admits he had invented the war on drugs to suppress anti-war left and black people, and this is this is pretty amazing. Dan Baum, who was writing a book, interviewed John Ehrlichman, and this was back in 1994. But he's now writing about this. He says, at that time, I was writing a book about the politics of drug prohibition. I started to ask Ehrlichman a series of earnest, wonky questions that he impatiently waved away. You want to know what this is all about? He asked with the bluntness of a man who, after public disgrace and a stretch in federal prison, had little left to protect. And now quoting John Ehrlichman, this was Richard Nixon's right-hand man. Quote, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or to be black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then heavily criminalizing both, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. And then the author, Dan Baum, writes, I must have looked shocked. Ehrlichman just shrugged. Then he looked at his watch, handed me a signed copy of his steamy new spy novel, The Company, and led me to the door. Wow.
And the COINTELPRO program goes into full effect, and the FBI begins targeting African-American groups organizing, and check this shit out. The first time that the police were militarized, the first time that SWAT was used, the inception of SWAT was put into effect to shut down the LA chapter of the Black Panthers. Slave Patrols.
From Chicago, Illinois, the mighty Charlotte.
For God's sake, give more power to the people. There's some people up there holding everything.
The thing that led to the Panthers was what we were seeing on television every day: attack dogs, fire hoses, bombings.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brothers.
Now we have the emergence of voices within the community that were saying we're not going to continue to turn the other cheek.
You tell them white folk in Mississippi that all the scared niggas are dead. We want black power. We want black power.
This was a revolutionary time. 50 countries in the world gained their independence in the decade before the founding of the Black Panther Party. This is the time when people are getting drafted to go and fight in Vietnam. So if somebody's coming and saying, well, if you're going to fight, why not fight right here in LA or Oakland? You know, that made a lot of sense.
We couldn't be absent and see what we saw. We couldn't unsee it. I was a cocktail waitress in a white strip club 2 years before I joined the Black Panther Party. How did that happen? The rage was in the streets. It was everywhere.
We're not gonna get nothing. Not by sitting around here doing these city demonstrations and nothing. People not gonna do anything. Well, how are we gonna do it? By violence. Violence. By uprising, having a revolution. Just put blood, you know, let everybody bleed a little bit.
For God's sake, why don't you give more power?
Relations between police and Negroes throughout the country are getting worse. One of the cities most troubled by animosity between police and Negroes is Oakland, California.
People always talked about freedom and what that means. During that time period, being black in America meant that you didn't walk down the street with the same sense of safety and the same sense of privilege as a white person.
There was absolutely no difference in the way the police treated us in Mississippi than they did in California. They may not have called you nigger every day, but they treated you the same way they did in Mississippi.
Police jump on you, beat you up, put the gun at your head. This is what we were going through on a daily basis.
When I first met Huey and Bobby, they were in the process of forming an organization for primarily self-defense. We didn't plan to have a nationwide organization or anything like that. We were organized and dealing with the problems in Oakland.
Huey had studied the law. In Oakland at that particular time, anyone could carry a firearm who did not have a felony conviction at the time. The firearm could not be concealed. It had to be in the open.
The California Penal Code section 12020 through 12027, and also the Second Amendment of the Constitution guarantees the citizen a right to bear arms on public property.
Huey said, we're going to carry our guns and we're going to follow the police. And if they stop someone, we're going to stop. We're going to maintain a legal distance. And we're going to observe these so-called law officers in the performance of their duties.
No one wants to touch the legitimate hunter, but we've got to protect society from nuts with guns.
When bands of armed people with loaded weapons can move about our streets intimidating and frightening citizens, then I think we should act, and we intend to act. It's my intention to make it a misdemeanor to have loaded rifles and shotguns and weapons in public places.
The police department had went to a local congressman to get a bill written. So Huey called me up and says, we have to go to Sacramento. It was conceived as a media event that the press is always at the California State Capitol.
We caravaned to Sacramento. I think there were about 30 of us all together. And most of us had some weapon.
We was on the state capitol on the lawn, and Ronald Reagan, then the governor of the state of California, was there, about 10 feet away from us, holding a press conference with these young, like, parochial school kids. And what happened, as soon as the press seen us, they gravitated from Ronald Reagan over to where the Panthers was.
The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense calls upon the American people in general, and the black people in particular, to take careful note of the racist California legislature, which is now considering legislation aimed at keeping the black people disarmed and powerless. At the very same time, racist police agencies throughout the country are intensifying the terror, brutality, murder, and repression of black people.
The State Assembly was in the midst of a heated debate when the young Negroes, armed with loaded rifles, shotguns, and pistols, marched into the Capitol.
When we got in the halls, you have to imagine there's 100 cameras, still cameras, print media people backing up, and I'm saying, where is the spectator section? And the press saying, this way, Bobby. Some party members got ahead of me with shotguns, pistol, and wound up on the actual floor of the California State Legislature.
They're heavily armed. Whether their weapons are loaded or not, nobody seems to know.
The armed group, who said they were members of the Black Panther Party, retreated to a service station several blocks from the Capitol.
I remember this one cop came by on a motorcycle, and he seen all these guns. He got on the thing, and that's when they started to swoop down on us from everywhere.
You have no right to take my gun away from me. You don't know the Constitution, right?
Sure we do. We're well aware of the Constitution.
I would like to have a gun back.
Why do you believe the legislature is racist?
Don't you know? You're a part of it, and you're obviously, it's a white system.
The news got to everyone in the black community who had a television, everyone who had a radio. It was in every newspaper across the nation. It put us on center stage.
I don't think that loaded guns is the way to solve a problem that should be solved between people of goodwill. And anyone who would approve of this kind of demonstration must be out of their mind.
When I heard about Sacramento, I was like, damn, these brothers are bad. They're here up in Sacramento in the Capitol, packing.
The boldness, the courageousness about it, the arrogance of it, that put a whole new face on things. I said, man, I want to be a part of this, whatever that is.
What we want, what we believe.
Point number one, we want freedom.
We want decent housing.
We want an education for our people. We want an immediate end to police brutality.
People join for all kinds of reasons, but the Panthers have a 10-point platforming program that really was sort of like the fundamental sort of organizing tool and orientation tool.
The civil rights movement was basically a Southern movement. So when you had an organization like the Panthers, who were taking on things like housing and welfare and health, that was stuff that people in the North could relate to and rally behind.
Our attack was not only against white supremacy, but it was also about capitalism. We actually thought that the way in which capitalism created a working class that was kept absolutely destitute, that was wrong.
So we took the position that in order for us to be free, that system had to be dismantled. We could not be free in a system that had oppressed us in the first place. So you have to get rid of that system.
They were able to establish their legitimacy as a voice of protest.
The chairman of the Black Panther Party, and here he is.
We have a film of your breakfast program. Is this without sound also?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Would you comment on this?
Yes, I will. This is a free breakfast for children program, and they're preparing the food there early in the morning. It's about 2 hours work in the morning. These party members primarily set this whole program up, and then we involve as many of the community people as we can.
Who I want here? People in there. Come on in, little brother. Come on in, little sister. Y'all can sit down and get something to eat.
Studies came out saying that children that didn't have a good breakfast in the morning were less attentive at school and less inclined to do well and suffered from fatigue. I mean, there was all sorts of scientific reasons to have a good breakfast in the morning. And we just simply took that information, and a program was developed serving breakfast to children.
After my father came home from Vietnam and was discharged from the Army and couldn't get work, we were going through a very hard time. Food was kind of, just the everyday necessities were hard. I was embarrassed to go, but when you went, kids are all laughing, and then all of a sudden the stigma, or whatever you thought was a stigma, went away, and you really got to see that, yes, this is what the Black Panthers are.
We were showing love for our people. If you have a child, if you know that, hey, these men and women are going to feed my child in the morning, that's a big deal.
The breakfast program actually really caught on. It served about 20,000 meals a week to young people in 19 different communities. So it wasn't a fly-by-night thing. It really actually was making a difference.
Just at the moment that the Panthers are turning towards survival programs, towards free breakfast programs, free clinics, and free food programs that will help them reconnect with the Black community and build their membership, and repudiating this earlier advocacy of armed self-defense and police patrols, J. Edgar Hoover attacks the Panthers.
Hoover saw any form of Black organizing as a threat to the status quo as he saw it. Change that would have involved equality, that would have put power in Black people's hands, was very much a threat to Hoover. He started something called COINTELPRO, directed against what he called Black nationalist hate groups.
COINTELPRO was the abbreviation of Counterintelligence Program.
The purpose of this new counterintelligence endeavor is to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of Black nationalists.
Neutralize could mean making somebody an informant, or putting somebody in jail, or having somebody killed. Hoover was sending letters to various offices almost on a weekly basis to come up with new ideas to go after members of the Black Panther Party.
245 of the 290 COINTELPRO actions were against the Black Panthers. One of the mandates was do not make this program public. Do not tell anybody that it exists.
FBI has a memo that states the objectives of counterintelligence operations. One is to prevent the rise of what they call the Black Messiah, a single charismatic leader that could unify the movement. They want to prevent the appeal of radical political movement to Black youth.
And they wanted to isolate these groups to prevent them from gaining respectability in the Black community.
And they were very explicit in stating these goals.
We were followed every day. We were harassed. Our phones were tapped. Our families were harassed. My parents were both visited by the FBI.
We must create suspicion with respect to their respective spouses, and your imagination and resourcefulness must be employed in order for the Bureau to be successful.
They would send letters to my wife, and the letters would say that Landon is sleeping with this woman, or sleeping with that woman, or sleeping with the other woman.
Slave Patrol! Slave Patrol!
Okay, so in the midst of all that, in the midst of all the, fully funded, fully federalized, fully weaponized slave patrol mechanisms of the slave patrol, the FBI and Hoover, King Hot Shit Slave Patroller, in the midst of all of its efforts to destroy the Black Panthers, and while it's going about the business of murdering Fred Hampton and other Black Panthers, while it's going about the business fully funded, of course, I don't know if I have to remind you, but fully funded, of course, by the entire mechanisms of the state, to essentially completely decimate all the sort of leftist foundations that had started to grow out of the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, and which, of course, the Black Panthers were sort of at the vanguard of in many ways, because what they showed was the greatest model for how the most oppressed and brutalized and poorest people in Amerikkka can organize themselves in defiance of the oppression of the American state, right? And so of course that had to be decimated by the FBI slave patrols. But in the midst of all that, while all that's going on, there's also the fight for women's rights growing in the 70s, throughout the 70s, and the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment, right? With, Gloria Steinem and others, which becomes heavily demonized by the right. Out of that comes Phyllis Schlafly, this scumbag, who talks about, women getting equal pay in the workplace and being treated as equal citizens in society and having some sort of fucking ownership over their own fucking physical autonomy, is a threat to Christianity in the American way, because, of course, in truth, it is a threat to the American way, because let's not be mistaken, it's not just a racist system, it's a racist patriarchal system.
The amendment simply states, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The amendment would also give the federal government the power to enforce that principle.
And so while it doesn't want equality for women, let's be clear, it doesn't want equality for anyone that doesn't match the model of the Christian white male. And it's a very, very, very peculiar, sort of fluctuating with fascist tendencies form of Christian, right? It's its own brand of heresies and perversions of Christian traditions. But yeah, in the midst of all of that is the women's rights movement, right? And the reason that this is important, and the reason I bring this up, is because in that fight, and Phyllis Schlafly arguing, you know, don't let the Marxists come and destroy the core American family structure and all this stuff. In the midst of that, and the tail end of it, when the Women's Rights Amendment is ultimately defeated, begins the birth of the anti-abortion movement.
We look for a national confirmation of this sacred right to life. We see it in Reagan's proclamation, and we see it in the platform of the Republican Party. That is important to you, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, because it is a national official statement that we respect the right to life of the unborn baby, and that it has the fundamental individual right to life which cannot be infringed. You must be aware of the tremendous campaign that is being carried on to eliminate this pro-life plague. Where does it come from? Well, it comes from several sources. One is from the feminists, the radical feminists who look upon the right to kill the unborn baby as the premier woman's right. And I urge you, every time you see somebody on television talking about women's rights, that you think to yourself, is this a person who thinks the premier woman's right is the right to kill her unborn baby? Because that is the way the feminists look at it. In 1977, they all trooped down to Houston with our tax dollars, all of the feminists you ever heard of, with Bella Abzug in charge, and they proclaimed what they wanted, their agenda for America. It was abortion on demand, paid for by the taxpayers. It was the whole gay and lesbian agenda. It was the Equal Rights Amendment. It was the government taking care of all children and affirmative action for women and women in combat. Well, this same crew is now over in Beijing trying to sell their ideology and agenda to the whole world. They're not going to do it, are they? No. Great. Just remember, they always want us to pay for it, too.
Where prior to this, it becoming a political talking point from the political mechanisms of the right wing in America, it was not an issue in any Christian community anywhere. But because Roe v. Wade had happened, it becomes the pivotal, not just talking point or core issue around which Christo-fascist evangelicalism will come to pivot and circulate and exist, as it were. It becomes the focal point by which the fascists will target the evangelical community, and out of this will grow the Christian Coalition with Ralph Freed and 700 Club, and the beginnings of all this is just kind of kicking off towards the end of the 70s. And what all of that is, this response to black people saying peacefully with people, marching and things like that, and saying, hey, we just want to be treated like human beings, and then just being brutalized and devastated, and then saying, well, fuck that, where we demand to be treated like human beings, and being murdered all over the country for it. All of this is being, on the nightly news every day. It's freaking out your average, middle class suburbanite at home, and they just want a little bit of calm and peace, and they just want to make America great again and restore the morning in America. And this is in the midst of all of this soup, gives rise to the fucking Reagan era. And that's what we're going to tackle in the next section. But check this video out, and we'll be right back.
Which judgment is right? So, for example, you got the idea that mothers and fathers should be able to bring their children into a death camp. They should be able to pay an assassin to dismember their child in the womb tearing off the head, the legs, the arms, disemboweling that child. Their judgment is, that is good, that is righteous, that is good for society.
Pray this in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, who came and died and rose again, that we might have eternal life. It's in his name that we pray. Amen.
It's beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Planned Parenthood, what many people don't realize is the biggest abortion clinic in our country. And they commit over 320,000 abortions every year.
Stop interfering with women's private health care decisions.
All of that.
In this fight, Lila Rose is building a new kind of army. Thousands of Facebook subscribers and Twitter followers. All fans of her group Live Action. And their contentious undercover work, they say, exposes wrongdoing inside abortion clinics. In a statement, Planned Parenthood called Live Action an organization that has been widely discredited for years because they deceptively edit videotapes and make claims that are flat out false. And that Planned Parenthood is proud to stand strong against unethical, illegal, and misleading attacks from political groups whose goal is to ban abortion completely. But these videos have made Lila Rose the conservative media darling.
Yeah, that mothers and fathers should be able to bring their children into a death camp. They should be able to pay an assassin to dismember their child in the womb, tearing off the head, the legs, the arms, disemboweling that child. Their judgment is, that is good, that is righteous, that is good for society.
Sacramento, I was like, damn, these brothers are bad. They're here up in Sacramento in the capital, packing.